that our East Coast fighter squadrons were having recurring weekly incidents off the coast with vehicles of unknown origin that had no transponders, that seemed like they were probably engaged in espionage or clandestine collection. They varied in type and size and so forth, but nobody was doing anything about it. Nothing. Nobody was even reporting it up the chain. It was just outrageous.
Congressman Tim Burchett, Republican of Tennessee, who's passionate about this issue, joins us now. Big picture, does the Pentagon know more than they're saying?
100%. 100%. These are Navy pilots. These are the top pilots in the world. And they didn't leak it, but somebody else leaked it. And for the longest time, they said it didn't exist. And now that they've come forward with these tapes, there's so many of them out there that show, they're flying into the water, under the water, in the air. We need to start addressing it, because if these, whatever they are, have control of the air like that, it's a national defense issue for us.
Americans have long been fascinated by UFOs, and the public has seen the videos that our Navy pilots have taken. But do you think that we have been contacted by extraterrestrials?
Well, I have talked to those Navy pilots, and they are sure that they saw something real. And of course, we've seen their video from their jets. What is it? We don't know. So now that I'm here at NASA, I've turned to our scientists and I've said, would you, looking at it from a scientific standpoint, see if you can determine so that we can have a better idea? We don't know if it's extraterrestrial. We don't know if it's an enemy. We don't know if it's an optical phenomenon. We don't think so because of the characteristics that those Navy jet pilots described as they saw it move around.
How concerned should we be about the briefing that you received on UFOs? Is that a concern that for pilots? Is there anything you can mention to us about that?
Well, I think some of the press reports are accurate. I think people are taking this issue much more seriously, and I'm not going to get into any of the contents of the briefing. It was a classified briefing, but what I think one of the key takeaways I'd have is that the military and others are taking this issue seriously, which I think in previous generations may not have been the case.
No one's laughing at you for believing in other worldly things?
Well, I'm not suggesting there are otherworldly things necessarily. I'm just pointing out that there is no scientific basis for denying that that could be the explanation in some cases. And moreover, it's hard to think of a better hypothesis in some cases. What other explanation accounts for a vehicle that can fly all day, drop from space to sea level at hypersonic speeds, then hover, then shoot off again at hypersonic speeds with a low radar cross section, with no combustion technology, no air intake, no wings, no visible means of propulsion, no control surfaces. If somebody can tell me a better explanation, I would love to hear it.
For each object, there's one of three answers. Either A, it's a U.S. government project that's top secret, and we don't want anyone to know about it, and they're testing it out on our own military. 2, it's a foreign military that's testing their newest and latest technology on our military. Or 3, it is something from out of this world. Which one of those 3 is most plausible?
To me, it's the third. If it was ours, we could end all conflicts because we would have the strongest air power ever.
We are now witnessing a tipping point. You see, the burden of proof used to be on the believers to prove that UFOs are real. Now the burden of proof has shifted to the government and the military to prove that they're not real. But the evidence is overwhelming. We have all this information from U.S. Navy pilots. We now have metrics. We can actually measure how fast they travel, how high they are, what kinds of centrifugal forces that they can experience. And science, remember, is based on things that are testable, reproducible, and falsifiable. Now we have testable information, a game changer.
Well, one of the things that one does in beginning to study the subject of UFOs is to answer the obvious questions of where do they come from, is it all real, and if that's true, how do they work, what's the evidence? And so one of the things that I did kind of early on was to take the data that we got from reading the literature that Stan Friedman was kind of collecting and take specific cases to see what clues were there. For example, the case of the Paul Hill sighting where there were two UFOs circling around each other at a known distance apart under a known cloud cover told you that there was 135 Gs of acceleration. So you had, really a good number. And then likewise, you can compute the Gs from the time to disappear over the horizon. So I developed a kind of a technical briefing on what we knew the limits might be, and also things relating to the physical evidence, that is indentations on a railroad tie that were so deep and so big a diameter told you, what the pressure was going to be per square centimeter. And you can make an estimate of what that meant with respect to the weight of the craft. And I concluded that there was just no question about what they were genuine, real objects, and that they worked in some specific way, and that the only question was to figure out how. That is, there was nothing like magic, and there are no secrets if you're smart enough. You just figure out what the equations are, and we weren't there yet. Here we were studying a technology that might be 1,000 years ahead of ours, and we might not have the materials or the methods or anything. So the right thing to do was to cancel it.
What I have learned is you cannot just hide your head and say these things aren't happening. We have military installations where hundreds and hundreds of people who are there see these things.
People think about space aliens, for me, is there's stuff flying over military installations and no one knows what it is, and it isn't ours. So for me, that's logical. You want to know what it is. I mean, it's common sense, right? If stuff's flying over the top of your most sensitive installations and it's not ours and no one knows whose it is, you should find out what it is and tell us.
Clearly, if somebody's in your house, in your bedroom walking around, you want to know who it is, right? You want to identify them. It's just a prudent thing to do.
So you see this as a national security issue?
Absolutely. I don't know. I mean, how could we look at it? How could it not be when you've got vehicles that are routinely penetrating restricted military airspace, and we seem unable to engage them effectively? We have no idea where they're coming from or what their capabilities are or what their intent is.
Bentwater's incident is a classic case where an apparent intrusion into our airspace, and indeed a landing in our country, was witnessed by serious-minded people in the military, responsible people doing a responsible job. And there are only two explanations for what happened that night in Suffolk. The first is that what the people concerned, including Colonel Holt, who was at the time the deputy commander of the base, and a lot of his soldiers, or airmen, they claim that something from outside the Earth's atmosphere landed at their Air Force base. They went and stood by it, they inspected it, they photographed it. The following day they took tests on the ground where it had been and found radioactive traces. They reported this. Colonel Holt wrote a memorandum which was sent to our Ministry of Defense. That is one explanation, that it actually happened as Colonel Holt reported. The other explanation is that it didn't. And in that case, one is bound to assume that Colonel Holt and all his men were hallucinating. My position is perfectly clear. Either of those explanations is of the utmost defense interest.
It's a worldwide phenomenon, not just here in the United States. There are certain places we really don't understand why, that there's more occurrences and have been over a long, long time.
And two, the Russians, the Chinese, we have information that they have seen these very same things, and they are investigating them just like we are.
Maybe there are other studies or programs that might shed light on this mystery?
Other programs that have been done and information they have, including different pieces of evidence.
Although as Minister of National Defense, I had sighting reports of UFOs. I was too busy to be concerned about them at the time because I was trying to unify the Army, Navy, and Air Force into a single Canadian Defence Force. And that itself was a kind of battle to the finish. So this was not high on my agenda. But about 10 years ago, I started getting interested. And, an investigation was launched into this whole subject, and a document was prepared which concluded that at least 4 species had been visiting Earth for thousands of years. And this is my own view at this stage as well. And what I thought to myself is there are huge issues here, huge issues. And the American people and the people of the world have a right to know what's going on because they're part of it. It's not just an isolated thing. They are different species and consequently may have different agendas. I don't think we can say that they all have the same agenda any more than we could say that the United States, China, and Russia had the same agenda. Well, enough on that for now. My interest is in full disclosure. And my only caveat is I think probably I would say 95 to 98% full disclosure. I know of 1 or 2 things that I'm not sure should be in the public domain, at least yet. They will be someday, I'm sure, but not maybe immediately. But just as children survive the idea of the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus when they become adult, I think that tax-paying citizens are quite capable of accepting the new and broader reality that we live in a cosmos teeming with life of various sorts.
We have sightings of all sorts. There have been reported thousands and thousands of sightings for 50 years or so. Large numbers of those sightings are indeed misperceiving natural phenomenon in some way. But a large number of them are not misperceiving. They seem to be well-documented events that represent flying craft that do not match anything we have in an earthbound arsenal, which is very short of saying we have validated in the public domain that they are ET craft. There have been ET visitation, there have been crashed craft, there have been material and bodies recovered, and there is some group of people somewhere that may or may not be associated with government at this point, but certainly were at one time, that have this knowledge.
I think there's an arrogance in government at that level that we cannot handle what's going on out there, and I just think it's a bogus cover-up. It doesn't fit, and it's about power and it's about control. Imagine if if we decided that there was something out there like you're seeing right there that comes from another galaxy or what have you. Immediately our focus would stop being on fighting each other, but looking at this. And I think it puts a lot of people out of business